When I entered my first DMC competition at the age of 15, I thought I was ready, but I wasn't. I still had a lot of things that I needed to fix with my scratching. These are the 5 biggest mistakes that I made back then, and fixing them helped me go on to win the DMCs at the age of 19. So if your scratching isn't sounding as clean, controlled, and musical as you would like, chances are one of these mistakes is holding you back. Now, the first mistake I made was I was trying to rush towards the more difficult scratch techniques too quickly. It's so important that you learn the foundational techniques before moving on to more complex stuff. You need to be able to do scratches like this before you attempt stuff like this. Now, in my opinion, the 2 most important foundational scratches to learn first are the forward scratch and the chirp scratch. Now, the forward scratch is where you let the sound play by releasing the jog wheel, but then when you pull the sound back, you turn the fader off so that the reverse sound doesn't come through. The reason this one is so important is it teaches you coordination. You're doing 2 different things with both of your hands, and this is so important when you're first learning. So I have a marker here on my DDJ Rev 7, and I'm going to make sure that the very top of the sound happens when the marker is pointing at 12 o'clock. So you can see here with the marker at 12 o'clock, I'm right at the beginning of this scratch sample. By the way, if you would like to download these scratch samples to practice with, then just hit the link in the description and I'll send them to you for free. So for the forward scratch, you start with the crossfader open, and then what you do is you let go of the jog wheel to let the sound play. And then I'm going to put my hand around the 2 o'clock position to stop the jog wheel moving. And then I'm going to close the fader. And then what we do is we bring the jog wheel back to the start of the sound with the fader closed so that that reverse sound does not come through. And then I'm going to open the crossfader and repeat the process. Let the sound play, put our hand around 2 o'clock, close the fader, and then bring the sound back to the start. Fader open, let go of the sound, 2 o'clock to stop the jog wheel, close the fader, bring the sound back to the top. It is so important to learn the forward scratch and practice it until you're performing it cleanly and consistently, because this is going to put you in such a strong position for when you go on to learn the more complex scratch techniques. And the second important foundational scratch technique for you to learn before moving on to more difficult techniques is the chirp scratch. Now for the chirp scratch, we're going to keep our hand on the jog wheel at all times. We're not going to let go of the jog wheel to let the sound play. Keeping our hand on the jog wheel is going to give us real control over that scratch sample. So what we want to do is we want to push the sound forward, and before we get to the end of the forward motion, we're going to turn the fader off like this. And then we're going to repeat the process, but in reverse. So we're going to bring the sound back to the top of the sample, and just before we get to the top of the sample, we're going to turn the fader back on, like that. Mastering these 2 techniques is going to put you in such a strong position when it comes to learning more complex scratches. It's really important that we don't try and run before we can walk. Okay, so the second mistake that I made is I was spending too much time trying to practice scratching on both sides. 99% of your favorite scratch DJs scratch on one side. So when it comes to practicing scratching and learning new techniques, if you're trying to learn each technique on both sides, then you're literally doubling your workload for not a lot of gain. If somebody goes to a guitar teacher to learn to play the guitar, that guitar teacher is not going to make them learn left and right-handed. That would just be crazy and a waste of time. If you take a look at D-Styles, for example, probably my favorite scratch DJ in the world, he scratches on one side, and he can probably do some simple stuff on the other side, but 99.9% of his practice would have been done on this side right here. I do think it's probably a good idea to try and learn some basic scratching on your weaker side, but if you're learning scratches like the crab or the flare, don't bother trying to learn all of those complex techniques on your weaker side. Just spend that time getting better on your strong side. This is going to be a far more efficient use of your time, and it's going to help you hit your goals way quicker. If you're serious about improving your scratching, then you should check out my Ultimate Scratching course. It contains over 80 lessons where I teach you everything that you'll ever need to know about scratching and beat juggling. You'll also get access to my private community where you can connect with other DJs and chat with me directly so that I can give you feedback on your technique to help you improve fast. If you'd like to check it out, then just hit the link in the description. Okay, so mistake number 3 that I made that really held me back was I had my hands on the jog wheel and the crossfader and I was way too tense. I didn't have a nice relaxed flow in my hands, which meant that my scratches just sounded stiff and robotic. Here's an example of what a tense hand would sound like when scratching. So you can see that my hand, the shape of my hand is quite rigid. And this causes your scratches to be a little bit too robotic and quantized. Whereas what you want is you want a nice relaxed flow in your hand so that you can change the shape of your hand to make different sounds, like this. Having that relaxed hand is just going to give you way more control over the scratch sample that you're using. So if your hand is tense and you only keep it at one angle, just like I used to, you're not going to be able to vary the movement and the shape of your hand, bringing it closer to the jog wheel, maybe bringing it up again to make brand new sounds and rhythms. A really good drill for practicing having a nice relaxed hand is to let the sound play and then bring the sound back as slowly and consistently in speed as you can. Doing this is going to ensure that you have complete control over the sound. So let's do that again. We'll let the sound play, and when the sound gets to near the end of the sound, when the marker is around here, I'm going to put my hand back on the jog wheel and I'm going to bring it back as consistently in speed and as slowly as I can. Check this out. Doing this is going to force you to have more control over the jog wheel. And you're also going to need to adjust the angle of your hand as you bring the sound back. So you can see right there that the angle of my hand is actually very close to the jog wheel. And to bring the sound back nice and slow and consistently is going to teach you to have more control over that jog wheel. And to have control over the jog wheel, your hand has to be relaxed. So if you've been struggling with this, drill that technique and you should see results pretty quick. Mistake number 4 that I made was I was not practicing correctly and with the right intent. What I mean by this is it's really important to go into a practice session with a clear goal and stick to it. So every time I was learning a new scratch technique like the stab or the crab or the flare, I began that practice session with the goal of getting closer to being able to perform that scratch perfectly. Rather than going into a practice session and just freestyling and just seeing what happens, the best and the quickest way to improve is to go into that practice session with one goal and not deviate from that goal. So for example, let's take the chirp scratch. If I was going to be practicing the chirp scratch with the goal of learning it and getting more competent and clean, this is how I would practice. So the first thing I would do is I would warm up by doing some simple chirp scratches or whatever the scratches that you're practicing that day. And the key is to make sure that you don't move on to the next part of your practice session until you've managed to perform what it is you're practicing cleanly. Again, this is kind of going back to mistake number 1. We have to make sure that we can walk before we try running. Then I might try some different pattern variations of the scratch, like these triplet chirps here. Making sure that your practice sessions are goal focused is going to help you level up way faster than just scratching aimlessly. It's also very important to make sure that you don't practice for too long. I recommend short practice sessions of like 15 to 20 minutes that are super intense and super focused. And then when things get a little bit too much after that 15 or 20 minutes, just walk away. And I guarantee you come back to the decks way fresher and ready to learn more. And mistake number 5 is using the wrong type of sound for the scratch technique that you're trying to perform. So for example, here on my free scratch tool, these are the 5 samples that I provide. So that one is kind of a mid-length scratch sound with a nice percussive beginning. Sample number 2 is nice and short. Sample number 3 is similar to sample number 1, similar length, and it also has a nice percussive start. Sample number 4 is a slowed down version of number 1. And then finally, on the 5th one, we have a continuous tone. Now, not every scratch technique works with every scratch sound. So for example, if we take sample number 4, this lends itself to scratches like crabs and transformers because it's a very long sound and we've got a lot of time and space to perform intricate fader techniques. So this is the transformer scratch. So to perform that scratch, we need quite a long sample so that we can let it play and then cut the fader on and off. If we were to try this with sample number 2, which is very short, the sound just isn't long enough for us to do those fader cuts. So shorter sounds like this one here are better for stab scratches and chirp scratches. If you're scratching in a club set and you're scratching with a kick drum on a track, then only certain scratch techniques are going to work with that kick drum because a kick drum is usually quite a short and percussive sound like this. So for a kick drum, you're only going to really be able to do baby scratches, forward scratches, drop scratches, and chirp scratches. Scratches like crabs and flares will not work with a kick drum or any super short sound. So making sure that you're using the correct scratch sample to perform your chosen scratch technique is super important and something that should not be overlooked. If you're ready to take your learning even further, then you should check out my Ultimate Scratching course. The link is down in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this useful. And if you would like to check out more from me and my channel, then YouTube recommends this video right here.